that difference was actually pretty huge for people because the nature of these things, it's stuff they don't want to be worrying about, right? Like as a developer, you're like, I don't want to do this thing over and over again. I want it off my plate as soon as possible. And Airplane sort of fulfills that for you. It's like, hey, we'll get out of your way. We'll let you automate this thing. You send the link to your other teammate who needs to run this thing, and then you're done with it.
All right, welcome back, everyone, to another installment of the Sourcegraph podcast. Today, I'm here with Ravi Parikh, the founder and CEO of Airplane, a new SaaS developer tool that helps productionize all those one-off scripts you end up writing to manage and maintain your modern cloud services. Ravi previously co-founded a company called Heap Analytics, a user analytics tool that helps product and marketing teams understand their users and customers. Ravi, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Awesome. So I'm going to kick things off with the question that I always ask every guest who comes on the show. How did you get into programming?
Yeah, of course. So it's a while back. I probably got into programming around when I was 10 or 11 years old. This was back in like the late 90s. So we had just gotten like the internet at our house, just like dial-up modem. It was, I think, Net Zero is the name of the service.
Nice.
So basically I thought this thing was pretty cool and I wanted to make my own websites. So, I found like one of those online free website builder, GeoCities type things, and started there with like those kind of WYSIWYG UIs and stuff. And I wanted to do more sophisticated things. And by my own website, I don't mean, anything super interesting. I mean like a place to share video game cheat codes or whatever I thought was cool at the time. And so I think I was using Dreamweaver. I got a copy of Dreamweaver from my dad bought me a copy of Dreamweaver, and then I started playing with that to like build websites and stuff.
Nice.
And so just basically did a lot of like web dev type stuff throughout the next several years, increasingly building more sophisticated things. And then I was really fortunate to go to a high school that offered a couple programming classes. So I learned some like basic C++, Java stuff as well, and learned like the basics of object-oriented programming and all that kind of stuff. So really just developed a love for like building stuff and seeing the product of what I've built. Everything else that I ever learned at that time in my life was like, oh, you learned this cool thing in math class or history class or whatever. And it's just sort of, it feels like it's just information in your brain. Obviously, it's sort of building patterns and concepts and stuff that will help you be a good person or whatever. But this was like, oh, I learned a cool thing, and then I can like go and like hack it together and say like, hey, I made this thing. And that was like incredibly rewarding. And that feedback loop just sort of grew.
That's awesome. So Dreamweaver, you're building websites as a kid, and then you studied some amount of programming, computer science in high school. I understand that you didn't go and become a professional software engineer straight away, though. There was a bit of a detour in your life.
No, I think if you took a kid who'd been building websites and writing code since 10, and then took programming class in high school, and then majored in computer science, and I don't think you'd get what happened next. But after I graduated college, I was actually a professional musician, like a DJ/producer for a couple of years. So nice. Really, another hobby of mine, a lifelong hobby of mine, has been playing music and then writing music as well. I've always written songs. I was in bands in high school and stuff like that. And so in college, I was in a band in high school, and then I went to college, and then I didn't have a band anymore. So I started making EDM because you can make it by yourself on a laptop alone.
Yeah.
And then so I got really into making electronic music. I put a lot of my stuff on the internet. And then around like 2010, 2011, a lot of my stuff got very popular on SoundCloud and YouTube. And then people started paying me to do shows. And then when everyone else was applying for jobs, I was like, well, I could keep doing this thing. So I kind of kept at it for a couple of years.
That's awesome.
Before I made it back into what I was probably meant to be doing anyways.
Was there anything that you kind of like took from the music world that informed the way you approach software and code?
Not in a direct sense, but I would say indirectly, I think the thing I loved, so I've been making music my whole life, but like when I was in high school, I was in bands with like multiple people, and you have like physical instruments, and then you have to like record things like on your guitar and vocals and all that kind of stuff. And then you got to spend a lot of time like arranging it and putting it together. And it's like, and then you see a final product of what you've built. And that feedback loop is really slow.
Yeah.
And then the nice thing about like I wasn't even into electronic music. I got into it because of the the ergonomics of how you make electronic music. It can be done all software, all on your own computer, all with digital stuff. And you like programming a melody or something like that into a VST and into your thing, and then you hit the play button. And what comes into your ears is literally identical to what the end user is going to hear, which is not true of like a physical instrument or something like that.
Yeah.
And so the feedback loop is way, way, way faster. And also you don't have to deal with 5 other people and coordination. So that idea of like just like fast feedback loops and that reward, that like instant dopamine rush of like making a thing and seeing the thing.
Yeah.
And that like it's true of electronic music, it's true of web dev, and it's something that I'm very attracted to. I don't have the patience for like long cycles of planning things out and thinking through things and working in that way. So I think that's always been really appealing to me, and that's why I've found myself doing the things I've always done. That's why I'm working on a SaaS tool now rather than many other things in the wide world of tech that I could be doing instead.
Yeah, fast iteration times. I think those are like really key, and I think a lot of developers out there would find what you just said just like spot on.
For sure.
Yeah. Okay. So, what was kind of the journey? You were making music professionally for a while. What brought you back into the software world?
Yeah, I mean, so like I made music professionally, like accidentally, to be honest, right? Like I made music, I put it on the internet, it got popular, and people started paying me to do shows, so I kept doing it, and I sort of stumbled into it. But the nature of it is like you're playing shows, maybe Friday, Saturday night, maybe Thursday night, or something like that. Yeah. You have a lot of free time, and in that free time, I made music and stuff like that. But I wasn't a super disciplined 21-year-old when it come to that stuff. So I had a lot of downtime, and sometimes in that downtime I, watched TV or whatever. But other times I just like hacked on stuff with my friends. So a good friend of mine from college, Matin, he had right after college, he went to Facebook and worked there for a little bit, but then he left Facebook and was hacking around some startup ideas. Mm-hmm. And then I kind of worked with him on a few different things that kind of went nowhere. But then, one day he sort of came up with this idea for Heap. And, we started working on that together. I actually didn't start working on it together with him initially. It was just one of the many projects that he was working on. I was like, it sounds interesting, whatever. But like, he kept, he was persistent, and he said, hey, I think this is going to be a really special idea or something like that. And then he kind of convinced me, and I was like, yeah, this makes a lot of sense. So also kind of stumbled into that, to be totally honest. Yeah. And then we started working on Heap together. We did YC together, raised some funding, and then it became very real. And I was like, I probably can't, tour 2 nights a week or 3 nights a week anymore.
That won't work. So, the co-founding a company and touring professionally, both rather time intensive.
a little bit different. And then I would just heads down on Heap for the next several years.
Interesting. So I think, one of the things folks would be curious about is like, what were some of the other ideas that you explored? What was that kind of like primordial soup like of ideas and experimentation? Were they all kind of like similar to Heap, or were they different? Or
no, they were pretty different. I mean, so I wouldn't even say that like what I was doing was exploring startup ideas. Mm. Like what I was doing at the time, this was back in 2012, right? Like I was making music, I was doing my own thing. Yeah. I was like, it's fun to hack on side projects. Matin had left Facebook. He was kind of thinking of it more as like startup ideas, but even then, we just wanted to hack on stuff together because we're friends and wanted to work on stuff together, and we had the time to do it. Yeah. So we made like really dumb stuff. Like we made like a meme generator, like those memes where you have like the text on the top and the text on the bottom. We like made a thing where you can make those really easily. There's like 100 of them on the internet, but like at the time they weren't very good, and we're like, we can make a better one. So we made one that was better. That's supposedly. Awesome. I don't know. And we did like a few other things like that, like really silly kind of social app type idea type things. And then I think like one of the reasons we built Heap, Matin had worked at a real job before at Facebook, and he had like firsthand struggled with their internal analytics system. And then in a lot of these other things we built, the first thing you do is you like throw Google Analytics on there or Mixpanel on there or something like that. And then we always like had some pain around like, oh, we built this thing, we shipped it. Oh, it looks like some people are using it. Oh, what are they doing? Oh, I don't know. Right. Like, and then so we constantly had this kind of like minor pain with analytics. And so Matin kind of came up with this idea, like the problem that we always had with a lot of these small apps and widgets we made, and that Matin had at much greater scale at Facebook, was, you would ship something, you would track the things you thought were important, and then people would use it, and they'd use it in ways you didn't expect. And then you'd be like, oh, but I don't know what's actually going on there. I wish I had tracked X. I forgot to track them clicking on that button, or I didn't track that stream because I didn't think it was that important. Right. But that's actually where they're going. So there's stuff like that you would think of later. And then the idea for Heap was like, Matin was like, well, why don't we just track everything people are doing client side and, vacuum up all that data. And then when you think of a question later on, you can go back in and retroactively pull out that data point, even if you didn't think it was interesting at the outset. So that was the idea behind Heap, and that's kind of how Matin sort of came up with that idea.
Yeah, I remember that because like you and I go back to college as well, and I remember chatting with you in those days. And I think the original way that Heap was pitched to me was, hey, like you're never going to be able to fully anticipate all the different ways in which users are going to use your product. So why not just track every single user action? We'll capture, all the CSS tags and DOM events, and then later you can kind of construct your analysis on top of that, which is really cool. And talk more about how that idea kind of evolved. So like first it was you and Matin working on this thing that would just allow you to track usage of your own kind of pet projects. How did that become a company? At what point did it become kind of, real and kind of like a serious thing that you both decided to kind of like go all in on?
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. It started as something pretty small. Matin just hacked together this, probably 100-line JavaScript script that you could drop into a website, and it would just track every relevant DOM event, every click, form submission, tap, page view, whatever.
Yep.
And then just like shove that into some database. And then you could just query the database if you wanted to. And if you like forgot to track a certain thing, then you could be like, oh, well, show me all instances of clicks on, the div that has the class name sign up button or, whatever it might be. So that was kind of how it worked. It was just, tracks a bunch of stuff, dumps it into a certain place, and then you can query it. And there's not a whole lot else to it at that point in time. And I remember so I actually kind of didn't work on the initial phases of it. Matin, we were working on these side projects. Matin wanted to hack on this thing. I was like, whatever. That's kind of how I felt about it. Because it's more B2B, and I had been a DJ for 2 years without any really strong need for analytics. So it didn't have the same visceral appeal to me.
Yeah.
So he was kind of hacking on that thing. And then I think he just pitched it to a lot of people saying hey, here's this idea. What do you think?
Mm-hmm.
You use analytics. And everyone's like, oh yeah, I have that pain point. We always forget to track stuff, all that kind of thing. So you hear that enough times, you're like, there might be something real here. So Matin kind of re-pitched to me. He's like, hey, there's something actually real here. You may want to work on this. I'm like, yeah, okay. So that sounds reasonable to me.
Yeah.
And Matin's a smart guy, and I trust him. So a lot of it came down to that as well.
Yeah.
So we started working on it together. Really, the way we kind of approached it was hey, we're solving this fundamental pain point that we had with other analytics tools, Mixpanel, Google Analytics, all that kind of stuff, which was around not tracking all the right things.
Yep.
But the other things those tools did were quite fine, right? It's not like Mixpanel funnels or bad funnels or anything like that, right? So we actually ended up, I think, just copying a lot of design patterns from not just Mixpanel, but whatever the best-in-class stuff was at the time. Mixpanel, Google Analytics, Kissmetrics. There was a few other vendors at the time that were doing interesting things, Flurry. And so we said okay, let's sort of get to parity on kind of the reporting features and all that kind of stuff, and have this core innovation, which is around data collection. And so that's what we ended up doing. And we built a really bare bones MVP that allows you to track data automatically, specify a CSS selector and an event type, like a click or a form submission or whatever, and then turn that into an event. And then you can use those events in the typical event-based analytics that you're used to with funnels and retention graphs and all that kind of stuff. So we built that. We mainly just spent several months hacking that together and building kind of a very early MVP. And we went through Y Combinator. And a lot of the early users of Heap were just other Y Combinator companies in our batch. And luckily, they're also a bunch of tiny startups, so the data scale was not super large for any of them. So that was not a thing we had to worry about a ton in the early days, which was nice. And just iterated based on their feedback and things like that. So, and then typical SaaS stuff, did a launch, got customers, listen to their feedback, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah.
Was there a point at which it really clicked for you? Whether it was the first customer outside of YC or, a particular user testimonial or some metric or milestone that you hit when you thought to yourself this is really going somewhere, taking off?
Yeah. So yeah, I would say that there is a moment, not a specific discrete point in time, but there's definitely a period where we kind of, in retrospect, hit a certain level of product market fit that made it sort of a viable business. I wouldn't say that at the time we understood that that's what had happened, right? So Heap got started in late 2012.
Yeah.
We spent most of 2013 just building what I kind of described, like building the product. We did a launch in like April of 2013.
Yeah.
We got a ton of signups for it. Like the core concept really resonated with people, but there were a lot of there was a lot of ways in which it fell short of the promise. So one major way was just infrastructure. As I mentioned, all of our early users were small YC companies that didn't have much data scale. But the moment any like real company with any real willingness to pay tried to use it, it would really, everything would time out and just not work. So we spent a lot of time that year really just like iterating on the infrastructure and making it functional for even like modestly sized companies and stuff. So Dan Robinson, who you know, Beyang, came on board the team at that time as CTO and helped work on a lot of that stuff. So that was one big bottleneck. The other big bottleneck was, and this was really like kind of a mindset shift too, was we built Airplane. I mean, not Airplane. We built Heap as a developer tool because we're developers. We're solving our own problem.
Yeah.
But in most companies, the people using analytics aren't necessarily developers, right? They're product managers or marketers or analysts. And the way Heap worked at the time was you drop this JavaScript snippet on your website. It would track every DOM event, every click, whatever. Yep. And you would then go into Heap and say, hey, when someone clicks on a div with the class name sign up button or whatever, or a button with the class name sign up button or whatever, call that the sign up event. Yep. You have to specify the CSS selector yourself. Most people don't know. Most people who wanted to use Heap don't know CSS. So we would have to like teach people, hey, right click on the thing that you want to do and click inspect element and copy paste that thing over there if you want to analyze it in Heap, which is obviously not like a super friendly workflow. And so people we thought of it as this is going to accelerate developers, but what people wanted was like low code or no code analytics really. And so we weren't really delivering on that because you still have to understand like how CSS and your DOM works. And even if you are a developer, you don't just have like a bunch of CSS class names memorized for like what's in your own DOM. So you're still kind of having to like do inspect element and a bunch of stuff to kind of like figure out what you're trying to define. So that was like not a great user experience. And some people figured it out, but the vast majority of people would like look at our slick demo video where we kind of gloss over that detail and then get into it and be like, oh, this is actually way more complicated than I thought. So we had to improve the infrastructure and we had to build this thing that we called the event visualizer, which was just like a WYSIWYG point and click way to define events. So it would pop over onto your website. You could like hover over an element. You'd see a red box that would say this is what the element is that you're trying to define. You click on it, you give it a name. You never have to worry about what the CSS selector was. And we put a lot of effort into like kind of auto-magically figuring out what you were trying to click on because as you know, like the DOM is like a nested hierarchy of things. And are you clicking on the outermost div that you're floating over or this little button or just that text within the button, like all that kind of stuff is fairly complicated. So, Matin built like a really, really slick interface for sort of defining events and stuff like that. So we released the event visualizer in February of 2014. And that was the point at which, in retrospect, the shipping of that, and then we also shipped like our improved infrastructure around the same time. Some big changes to the infrastructure at that time. So Feb 2014 was the first time where people were signing up the whole time because like the promise was really good and people were just finding it somehow. But that was the first time where people signed up and like a non-trivial percentage of them actually stuck around after the first month after the free trial and like paid and kept paying. We were like, oh, that's kind of new. Like they're not just churning, so it's cool. And then also our support ticket volume grew from like 3 to 5 support interactions a day to like 50 in the span of like 3 or 4 months. And that was just like, whoa, people are asking real questions, not just like, hey, can you help me get started? But like, hey, like my funnel is showing this data, but it doesn't really match up with my, like that kind of like real questions that indicate some level of engagement with the product. And so it kind of exploded overnight. And in the span of like 3 months, you were like, wow, the volume is just like really taken off. And so like that was clearly when we had a sense of like product market fit.
Cool. And when you talk about like the support ticket volume, going up, how did you handle that? Because I imagine the team was still pretty small at that point in time. Was it just the 3 of you?
Yeah, it was the 3 of us, and then we had one other engineer on the team.
Okay.
It was that was kind of like the last time I ever wrote code at Heap around that time because I was actually doing all of the support myself.
Wow.
like things that were really specific to
Sure.
something that Matin or Dan knew
Yeah.
well would get escalated to them. But for the most part, I was handling all of it. And so there was one point, it just got to the point where I was just answering support tickets literally all day long. And so that's when we said like, hey, we should probably like maybe hire for someone to help with this.
Yeah.
And so at that point, I basically shifted over onto like building out the customer facing side of the company. So I hired the first couple solutions engineers to basically do support and like customer enablement and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I hired the first few sales reps at that point to handle the inbound kind of people looking to use the product, all that kind of stuff. So that was that was kind of the beginnings of that transition over onto building up the go-to-market side.
Yeah, I feel like people talk about founder-led product and founder-led sales, but we don't talk enough about founder-led support. I feel like support is one of those critical functions because when you're starting out, it's literally like where the rubber meets the road, right? People are trying to use your product, they're running into issues, and like you are literally the only person in the world who can bridge that gap. Thinking back to early days of Sourcegraph, like I also spent a good deal of time in the support role, and it seems like a maybe like not talked enough about thing because it's so critical to making sure your early adopter users and customers have good experience.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's also I think something changes when a company sort of creates a dedicated support function and sort of abstracts that away from the founders, the engineers, or whatever. And if you keep those things too separated, which we did, I think, at certain points at Heap, I think the feedback cycle of like getting the customer pain points into the ears of the people building products is there's just a game of telephone that happens there a little bit. And you, whereas when you're the person who's both building the product and fixing the issues in the product, like you have just this intuitive sense, even if you never quantify anything at all, of like what's wrong, what's important, what's not important, what's repeatable. And you can sort of translate that directly into roadmap in a way that you just inevitably lose as you grow. Obviously, you gain a lot of other great things as you grow, but you can never really replicate that. And so I think you should try to not let go of that as much as possible. I think at Heap, we let go of that a little bit too soon, in my opinion.
Interesting. You're talking about like that kind of, it's like the whole user feedback cycle, like, support, which is really just you hears about it and then relays. In a large company, you'd relay that to the product team, and then the product team would incorporate that into the roadmap and trade that off against other priorities. But like in the early days, when it's mostly just the founders and the first couple of employees, it's like you are wearing all those hats in some sense. So you can kind of like quickly feed user pain and customer asks. Just like super quickly into adjustments in the product roadmap.
Exactly. Yeah. And like when it's just the founder doing all that stuff, it's like the feedback loop is both fast and it's like as high fidelity as it's ever going to get. Right. Like it's, I feel like when you're at a certain scale, you're like, oh, we have a support team and a sales team, and they like write all the customer requests into some spreadsheet somewhere, some like SaaS product that tracks those things. And then you can see, 80 customers requested the XYZ feature. But like that is not like that's great that's there, but that's like so much thinner than being like I directly had the conversation with the customer who wanted the XYZ feature. And like actually the XYZ feature, what it really represents is whatever, right? And I think that, being the same person who hears that and then implements it and scopes that out, that connection is difficult to replicate.
Yeah, totally. So, in that experience of running frontline support, were there kind of beginnings of what would eventually become Airplane there? Because, as I understand it, Airplane is all about turning these scripts that you might write, as a support engineer or maybe as an engineer supporting the support team to do these kind of like ad hoc or one-off tasks.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's really where the idea for Airplane came from. It's like the 5 years I spent running support, sales, professional services, customer success, marketing, all the kind of customer facing roles in the company. And so, Heap is a fairly complicated cloud product. It's analytics. And so there's a lot of ways in which your data can kind of be weird or not the shape you want it to be. And so, for example, you implement a certain identity API wrong, and then all of a sudden you've done things like grouped 1,000 users as one user in a way that's irreversible or something like that.
Yeah.
And then your data is just permanently messed up unless somebody can go and like undo that.
Yeah.
And there's no big glowing undo button in the interface for obvious reasons. And so that kind of stuff would happen all the time. And in these situations, like our solutions engineering team or professional services team didn't necessarily have the tools to like solve those issues. Like these like really niche like data issues that would take a lot of compute or resources to kind of solve. It's not a thing that you just want to have like some off the shelf button that like does whatever. So what ended up happening is our solutions team or professional services team or whoever would escalate a lot of these things to engineering. So it'd be like these kind of clean up this data, or somebody wants to fulfill these GDPR requests, or somebody needs even simple admin operations, like someone needs their email address changed or something like that. Those kinds of things would have to get sort of fulfilled by someone on the Eng team. So someone on Eng, we had this library of like 70, 80 scripts that we developed over time. So someone from Eng would just SSH into a production server and run a script or run a query or something like that to solve one of these issues. And then for some of the more common issues, like these would be constant, like every few days escalations that people were just getting hit with. And in aggregate, it was happening dozens of times a day.
Huge disruption.
Yeah. It's very interrupts heavy. There's a context loss often. Like someone from support will say, oh, I need X done. And someone will do it. And they'll be like, oh, that's not what I meant. There's just a latency issue where like, hey, you filed a JIRA ticket and then it takes 4 days to solve because someone, worked on other things. And it's just disempowering in general to feel like, hey, I'm customer facing and I can't even solve a lot of their problems myself because I don't have the tools to do it. And so that was kind of the status quo. And the other problem is like, so we would say like, okay, great, we should just build better tooling for the support team. The problem with that is that like, let's say you have this script that is very computationally intensive and takes an hour to run. Turning that into a tool is like pretty non-trivial. Like you need to put a UI in front of it. You need to have it notify someone when it's done running. You need to have some sort of mechanism by which it can be rerun if it fails or something like that. You need to, what if it stops in the middle? What are you supposed to do? You need to like make sure, if this is like very computationally intensive script, it's not going to tie up a resource in a way that's like, not what we want. You need to make sure that if it's sensitive and irreversible or somewhat irreversible, you need to make sure there's permissions around it so only the right people have access to it. You need to make sure there's an audit log around it so that if something bad happens, you know who did it, when they did it. Like it probably should integrate with your identity provider. When you have a 200-person company, you can't be adding people manually to this tool every 5 minutes. Like all those things are like a big pain to build, right? Like you maybe wrote that script in a couple hours of work, but like integrating with all those other systems to make all that other stuff happen is going to be probably 10 more hours of work to really do correctly. And so that was kind of where the idea from Airplane came, because all those things I just described, those are kind of boilerplate. They're the same at every company. The bespoke logic of this script is specific to your company, but the UI, notifications, permissions, audit logs, approval flows, all that kind of stuff is pretty, we can give that to you off the shelf. So that was the idea behind Airplane.
Yeah. I feel like that pain point, it feels universal. I feel like almost every developer has had an experience where, someone comes to me with an ask. Maybe it's a support engineer. Maybe it's someone on the sales team. Maybe it's someone fielding a customer request, like delete this user. Now I got to go do something. It's like not worth building it into the actual product. It's just like a thing that I need to get done. I go hack together a bash script. I write it once, intending never to think about it ever again. I just needed to do this thing. And then, a couple days later, same thing pops up. And I'm like, okay, I guess I'll revisit the bash script. And then later on, someone wants to reuse the script. I send it over and they run it. It doesn't work. And then now I have to like field a bunch of questions about this. And okay, so like that's the pain point that you're solving.
Exactly.
How does Airplane solve that? And maybe we could dive into the product a little bit.
I'll give a high level, and then I'm also happy to show a demo if that'd be interesting.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
So basically the way Airplane works is, let's say you have that bash script that you described. What you can do is you basically, we have a command line utility that you can use to deploy that bash script to Airplane. And what that means is that we will, wrap that in a Docker container. And then when somebody goes and then it can live within your cloud, it can live in our cloud. That's kind of up to you. We have kind of a self-hosted agent, which is pretty easy to use that you can deploy behind your own VPC. And then when somebody goes into the Airplane UI, they'll see, whatever you named that script. So, call it, delete user or whatever.
Yep.
And it'll take in whatever parameters you specified. And then they can basically just fill out those parameters in a web form, essentially, hit execute, and then it'll spin up that Docker container, run that script, pass in those parameters, and then print out whatever outputs that script generates to the screen. So really, really simple concept. It's just sort of like a wrapper around that script, but the wrapper achieves the effect of not having to worry about like the environment in which it's running. It's sort of serverless. You don't have to care about it as an end user. You don't have to be technical. You don't have to like know how command lines work to be able to run that script. You can put some like guardrails around it, around like the input validation rules and all that kind of stuff. So you make sure garbage doesn't get passed in. Everything that gets run in Airplane is audited. If it's a long running thing, you can get notified when it's done running or if it fails. Like if it's a really sensitive thing, you can put an approval gate in front of it so that someone can only run it if a second person has said this is okay. So all that kind of stuff is really easy for you to configure as the end user of Airplane. The idea is like that bash script that you described, the first time you write it, you probably just run it one-off. The second time it ever comes up, like the marginal effort to turn it into an Airplane script should be so low that you never run it a second time sort of yourself, right? That should be the idea. And so we really try to make it so that it's literally a 1-minute process to turn that script into this shareable, safe widget.
Awesome. Can we see that process? Is that
Let's do it.
All right. Yeah. And for folks listening, audio, I will narrate what's happening on the screen, and you can always go to the site. We'll drop that in the show notes if you want to check out the product directly. Cool.
So this is the Airplane UI. So this is basically what you see when you log in, and so this is kind of what an end user sees. They see a library of kind of operations that are available to them. So all these represent kind of individual scripts. We call them tasks. So
there's a giant list. These are all like scripts that people have written and kind of like productized in Airplane right now.
Right.
Okay.
This is our this is our demo instance. So it's a little bit messy. There's a lot of duplication here. But you can organize things into folders. You can favorite things, all that kind of stuff. But you can basically it's just a big list. So you can search through it, all that kind of stuff. But it's not super complicated. And so let's say you wanted to do something here. Like issue Stripe refund task over here. You would just click on it, and it's represented by a web form. And so as an end user, you would sort of fill out the web form, type in whatever the details are that you need, and then hit execute task. And then basically it'll sort of spin up a Docker container, run that script in whatever environment that was configured when this was built, and then you'll see some output over here of what happened. So you basically have like user readable output over here, which you can just pass in a JSON blob into a print output function that we basically give you, and it'll look like this. And then there's also just your standard raw logs, which is just like standard out over here as well. And so as a developer, you can kind of use the logs to debug it. If something went wrong over here, you can put whatever you want to standard out. But you can also show like users like pretty printed logs to like the end user. So that's kind of what the end user experience is. Very, very simple. You run a script, you get a result. It shows up in this activity log over here, where you can see sort of a full history of what everybody has done in here. And so that's the end user experience. The developer experience is pretty simple as well. So you hit new and you hit task. And then basically you get a number of options in terms of how you want this task to get executed. So for example, if it was that bash script that you said earlier, you would pick shell. If it's like Node or Python, you can do that. You can also use like SQL and REST if you don't write as much code. I'm actually going to demo this using SQL just because it's sort of the easiest to show in the UI itself.
Cool.
The rest of these require you to use your command line to actually deploy stuff to Airplane, which is actually the prominent way people use it. But it just takes a little bit longer to kind of demo that.
Okay, so in other words, you have two options. I could write the script on my own machine and then upload it to Airplane, but you also have kind of like an in the GUI way of just writing a quick script, which is what you're showing now.
Right, and so I'm going to show the GUI way of doing it. But
got it.
Like, we actually prefer that you write these things locally.
Sure, but this is for the demo. It's like...
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, so I'll pick SQL over here. I'll give it a name. So I'm going to pick something really simple. So like update a user's email. So this is basically just going to be a task that updates the user's email address. So maybe it takes in whatever their current email is, and that's maybe a text field.
Yeah.
And then it also takes in the new email, and that's also a text field. And then over here, I can specify input validation rules, regexes that this should match or things like that if I wanted to. I can also do much more complicated inputs. These are just strings, but I can do file uploads and date times and stuff like that. So I'm just going to hit continue though. So I pick a database for this to query against. So I'll pick this demo data database, and I just specify the query. I'm going to add a couple SQL parameters just so that we don't have like a injection attack, but I'll do something like this. So basically what I'm doing here is this params, like these double curly braces with this params syntax. This is basically...
You're just substituting a value into the script.
Right. Yeah. So this params is like the global object that represents, the two parameters that we specified earlier. And then specify the query. So it's something like update users set email equals new email, where
you got syntax highlighting and autocomplete. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. I think there's just some library that we're using to do all that. But
okay, cool.
Yeah, so you get some simple introspection here on the database and stuff. But so once we specified our query, I hit create task, and that's all I had to do. So now I've taken maybe what I was previously going into the database myself and running, and turn it into a thing that anybody can just fill out an email and run. Let me pull up an example email so that I can just show it in action.
So what he did is he typed the SQL into the box, and then he templatized it, and then, so now it's like templated by these input fields, email and new email, to update the user's email, and now you have like a kind of a button you can click, and then you fill out the form, and then it runs that script for you.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to run this task we just created in 15, 20 seconds of work, and just specify this current email, Billy Hernandez at blueskyscorp.us. And I'm going to just add a +1 to Billy's email over here, and I'll hit execute task. So it ran it pretty quickly. It's a simple one-row SQL query, and it says one row affected. The output here isn't super expressive. It's just a simple SQL query. But if I go back to this list all users task, which is just a select query against that same database, hit execute, and then look up Billy over here, I'll see that he now has a +1 after his email address in the database. So
got it.
Not super surprising. We ran a simple SQL select query and it updated the database as expected. But the idea here is that, now I never have to go and do this myself again as a developer. I can just basically have anybody in my company have access to this task. And there's very little room for error there. Like that SQL query is going to, if they were using something like a Postico or one of these SQL editors, there's like infinite degrees of freedom there where you could accidentally run a update query without a where clause or something like that. But over here, you have just like a guarantee that this is going to get executed the way you expect. And it'll live in your activity log. The other thing here is that if I edit this task and I go to advanced over here, I can get a lot more granular about who has access to this. So if I hit explicit permissions, I can say, maybe we only want the engineering team really to have administrative access, which means only they can kind of run it or edit it. But I'm going to say, I'm going to say Josh, my co-founder, he's only going to be a requester, which means Josh can't actually run this himself. He has to make a request to someone on the engineering team who has admin access before it'll actually run. So if I hit update task, what Josh would see is he would see a UI that looks something like this. So same as the previous UI, it asks for a current email and a new email, but also asks you to give a reason and pick a reviewer. And that reviewer would then get a Slack notification which says, hey, Josh is requesting this update user email address task to get run. Do you approve it or reject it? Yep. And so you can really easily add in these kinds of flows that are really important to be able to run sensitive operations at scale in a larger organization. And so it wouldn't be difficult, but it would be time consuming to create a system where in order to run the script, I want to make sure that someone has to make a request and then someone within a different user group gets a Slack notification asking them for that request. We basically just bundle those concepts together in a thing that you can configure with a couple of button clicks.
That's awesome. So if I want approval, I can get approval, and then upon approval, it will automatically run. I don't have to sign back in and rerun with approval. Okay, cool.
Yeah. Once Josh hits or someone on the engine team hits approve in Slack, then it just runs automatically. So that's the high level idea, is just to make it as simple as possible to broaden access to scripts and queries and things of that nature while keeping it as safe as possible. And so that's the high level basic concept of the product. One thing I don't want to get into right now, just in the interest of time, is we have a feature called runbooks, which allows you to sort of orchestrate these things a little bit. So let's say you've built several scripts and you want to create something a little bit more complicated. Let's say you have I'll give an example. Let's say you have a delete user workflow where what I actually want to do is first run a script that deletes the user from prod. Then I want to run another script that hits the intercom API and unsubscribes them. And then hit another script that generates an archive of all their historical data and sends them, and then finally sends them an email with that archive. I can build 3 or 4 different Airplane tasks for each of those steps, and I can stitch them all together into one runbook where I can execute them in order, pass data between them, add conditional logic, all that kind of stuff to that flow.
So you've built your runbooks is the way you compose these primitives that you've constructed. It's almost like
Exactly.
your own internal version of Zapier or Zapier.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. What's been like the like when you think about like Airplane V0, like the first thing that you shipped that you thought was going to be the product that people wanted. What are the big differences between that and what you have now? Is it largely the same, or like are there any like major kind of realizations you had along the way?
Yeah, so it's the core of it is the same. I mean, we started with this idea of like, how can we make it really easy to turn a script into an app, right?
Hmm.
That was kind of the high level idea.
Yeah.
So that core is still there. Things that we have added, not just features that we've added over time, but I would say that the biggest mental model shift has been, I when we started Airplane, I would say that the primary thing that we were trying to do was make it possible to take things that can only really be written as scripts, right? Like things that aren't super easy to model as a REST endpoint or a simple SQL query or a CRUD operation, and turn them into things that would be appified. Because Heap had so many of those. Heap is a data company. There were tons of these like long running operations, these multi-stepper operations,
complex things, involved things.
Yeah, that's what we thought would be like the core use case of the product. And that is still very much what you can do with Airplane. But a lot of what people do with the product is really simple stuff that honestly you could do in 20 other ways, right? Like the update user email address thing I just showed you, we are not unique in giving you the ability to parameterize a SQL query and let someone run it over and over again. You can use tools like Retool to build a simple UI that hits a database and does that thing. You can use tools like Post-to-Code to have saved queries that people can execute over and over again. And so I remember like people started using Airplane to do that kind of stuff. And then we added in the dedicated SQL and REST builders, the one I just demoed to you, so that you don't even have to write a script to do simple queries and stuff like that. And I remember asking people, like, why would you use Airplane for this? Why not use one of the other 50 other tools out there that are much more mature, much further along? And they're like, really, it's just really easy to use Airplane. Like, that was the whole idea. Like, the idea was like, if you're using many of these other tools, you have to configure a lot of stuff, or have to build UIs or do all kinds of stuff that you don't really care about. Whereas, like, for Airplane, we've surgically ask you to just concentrate on the thing that matters, the only thing that you as a developer need to bring to us, because we can't figure it out for you. We don't know what query needs to get executed. You know that. But all the rest of the stuff, the UI, the permissions, the notifications, all that kind of stuff, we can just make some fairly intelligent assumptions about what that should look like. Like it's a web form to execute a function at the end of the day. We don't ask you to drag and drop form fields on page. We just say, hey, this is probably what this should look like. And everyone's like, yep, that's fine. And
that's brilliant.
I think that was the idea, was just like this super clean separation of concerns of like, hey, you care about the backend logic, we'll worry about everything else. And that just appealed to people. And like the fact that it would take 30 seconds to build an Airplane and maybe 10 minutes to do it in another tool, that difference was actually pretty huge for people. Because the nature of these things, it's stuff they don't want to be worrying about, right? Like as a developer, you're like, I don't want to do this thing over and over again. I want it off my plate as soon as possible. And Airplane sort of fulfills that for you. It's like, hey, we'll get out of your way. We'll let you automate this thing. You send the link to your other teammate who needs to run this thing, and then you're done with it.
Especially if it's like an internal app or tool. Like I don't really care about the placement of the freaking template fields. I just want like a form that someone can figure out. It doesn't have to be pretty. Although I'm sure it looks reasonable in Airplane because you make reasonable assumptions. But like I don't need to like design that thing. I just want something that someone can like type text into and then click a button.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. I think this like kind of brings up another interesting topic, which is you started as a developer tool. Airplane still I think describes itself as a developer tool, but I hear it increasingly mentioned in conjunction with like low code or no code tools, like Retool. So and maybe that's like a common theme too, because like you mentioned with Heap too that you started developer first and you eventually became this kind of like low code analytic solution. So do you see Airplane kind of evolving into this like general purpose like low code app builder, or is the DNA of the product and the company still like strictly a developer tool, or maybe the boundaries are like getting blurred here?
I would say, so I do think the boundaries are getting blurred all over the map, but I'd say for Airplane specifically, more so than anything else in this space, whatever this space even is, we think of ourselves as very, very much a developer tool first and foremost. And to clarify, I mean like the people who build stuff in Airplane are developers. The end users of Airplane tasks and runbooks are often non-developers, more often than not. But we do not intend for non-developers to build things in Airplane. Occasionally it happens, but I'd say at least 97% of everybody building tasks and runbooks in Airplane is a software engineer. And so you mentioned like we get lumped in with the low code, no code stuff. I think like, well, I think every piece of software is a low code tool in some sense, right? But because you could have written code otherwise. But
Sure.
aside from being pedantic, I would say like I would say that like I think the reason we get lumped in there is because a lot of people see the problem. So the problem fundamentally is that you have a small set of people in a company. Maybe it's the whole eng team. Maybe it's even a subset of the eng team who have access to an operation, right? They have access to a thing that only they can do, and more people in the company need access. Sometimes those more people are other engineers, but usually it's non-engineers who need access to that thing. And so a lot of other companies look at that problem and say, how do we solve this issue? What we should do is we should build tools for the non-engineers so they can solve the issue themselves. And that's a reasonable impulse. But our thing is we're like, hey, a lot of the things that people need access to write against production data. And like, no matter how savvy your solutions eng team is, if they're not part of the core software development workflow within your company, you're going to be really reticent to give them right access to a production database. Even if they're like at Heap, everybody on our solutions eng team was very savvy and very talented and could easily have had right access to it. It's just that they don't understand like this. They're not in the day to day of the eng team, so they don't know. Exactly what the implications are of doing.
There's a lot of pitfalls and foot guns, like things that you don't realize. Yeah.
Right. And so you want things that are going to touch production data and write against production data to be governed the same way you want the rest of your code governed. You want it to go through version control. You want it to go through code review, all the rest of that stuff. And so I didn't really demonstrate this in the demo, but like everything in Airplane is governable via code. Like you can write scripts, put them in your code base, put a YAML that represents a task definition. And that's sort of the way we recommend you use it, actually. The UI stuff is easy to get started onto, but anyone using Airplane at scale should be governing it the way they govern the rest of their code base. And so that idea is very core to Airplane, that this is a developer tool because it requires like the valuable things about Airplane are the ability to write against production data. And most companies are only really going to have their eng team have the ability to do that. So that's kind of a hard sort of core requirement of it. With Heap, I think it was we drifted over time because like the core end users of analytics ended up being a little bit different than what we thought they were. But I think we've seen enough data and we're far enough along at Airplane where I think we see that there's at least for a lot of companies, that the engineering team is the right people to be selling to. There might be other companies out there which are better fits for some other approaches, but yeah.
Got it. So do you ever foresee a world in which like a non-engineer would use Airplane to write some piece of code? Say someone on the sales team wants to write some logic to, I don't know, analyze some piece of the funnel, like analyze the conversion rate of a particular set. Maybe that's more of a Heap use case actually, but like conceivably someone on sales and marketing or some other function might want to write some code that pulls some data and or enact some action. Is that something that like you think might occur in the future? Or do you think it'll strictly be like engineering teams are still like writing these scripts and making apps for other people to run? Yeah,
so I think this is like another kind of possibly, but the answer is like possibly, but I think it'll still be eng teams. And the reason I say that is because so what you're describing does happen, but I tend to see situations where non-engineers have like write access to company data is usually data that lives in third-party tools. So there's a lot of systems, there's a lot of situations where you're like, oh, someone on the sales team has access to CRM data and they want to like have, every time a new lead comes in, they want to have a Slack notification go out or something like that. If what you're doing is you're stitching together third-party APIs, you can actually give a lot more freedom to people because like the downside is not as high, right? Like if somebody messes something up there, it's not that big of a deal at the end of the day to like clean up some CRM data or something like that. It's not prod, right? Like it's not production data. And so I think like that's where tools like Zapier and all that kind of stuff come in. And so theoretically, you could use Airplane to do the same things that those tools do, but they're much more optimized for that use case. And they've like built their 5,000 API integrations and all that kind of stuff that we're just not going to do. We see our sort of core differentiation and the core like unmet value that we're like unmet need that we're solving is really around allowing you to like broaden write access to production data, like core production data. In a way that's safe, easy.
Got it. Makes sense. Is it you're focused on the engineer as your core user in terms of like sweet spot customer? or company that would use Airplane? Is it like any company that has engineers that runs code in production, or are there like particular sectors or company sizes where you're particularly like resonant with prospects?
I would say in the long term, yeah, we want every software team backing a cloud product to be able to use Airplane. If you're building
Mm-hmm.
on-premise software, it doesn't the way Airplane works doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you're building a cloud product, and that doesn't necessarily mean a SaaS company, it could mean like the Chase Bank mobile app, right? Like
Yep.
anytime you're sort of like responsible for a piece of cloud software that needs to have these sorts of one-off maintenance requests happening and on-call runbooks being executed and all that kind of stuff, I think Airplane's a good fit. That being said, like where we've done really well so far in this sort of short lifespan of the company to date is it's mostly small to mid-sized SaaS companies, fintech companies, marketplace companies, healthcare companies, basically companies that are, let's call it between like less than maybe 500 employees usually. So they're small enough where they haven't necessarily built out a ton of internal tooling yet. They're small enough
Yep.
where they're still iterating super fast, and then the internal tooling needs are evolving really quickly. And so as a result, like, if they're fast growth, then like the needs are even more acute. So,
Yeah.
if you take like you're some 100-person SaaS company with a 15-person solutions engineering team and a 10-person sales team or whatever, and a 20-person eng team, and there's like a massive backlog of product to build, and you have engineers just like one-off helping with every customer onboarding and with like answering random tickets and stuff like that. That's like the sweet spot for Airplane, right? Because we can just say like, hey, you can get all this work off your plate as the eng team,
Got
empower
it.
your customer-facing teams, and accelerate your roadmap essentially.
Cool. What's kind of next on the roadmap? Anything you're looking forward to in the upcoming months and year?
Yeah, so there's quite a few interesting things we're working on. I mentioned briefly that the way we want people to use Airplane is the way that they like as similar to their typical engineering workflows as possible. So writing a Python script locally and testing it out locally,
Yep.
deploying it to Airplane, and then version controlling it and testing it and all that kind of stuff. Like that's kind of the way we want people to use Airplane. Where Airplane is today versus where we want it to be, there's still a bit of a gap there. So we're doing a lot of iteration on the developer workflow, and we want to get to the point where it like matches kind of what you're used to from really like best in class developer tools like Vercel or something like that.
Got it.
Just making it really, really simple and like not having to introduce a whole lot of new concepts into how you use the products. But even today, it's pretty clean, and that's what people love about the product. It's just the developer experience. So trying
Yeah.
to get it from good to great, really. So that's one big area of investment. Another big thing is like we're really trying to deepen the set of things that are possible with Airplane. So I very quickly showed you kind of like what we call a task in Airplane, which is kind of like a single business function that needs to get
Yep.
executed. And then I mentioned like you can do what's called a runbook, which you can stitch multiple tasks together. So you can do like pretty simple linear flows of like linear composition of like 5 or 6 things in a row. There's even some
Yep.
conditional logic you can insert into there, but we're going to greatly expand the set of things that's possible there. So for example, we'll add the concept of loops where you can say, hey, let's take the output of this SQL query, like all 100 rows in this output, and then execute this task 100 times for each row in that output or something like that.
Interesting.
So you'll be able to do that. We'll have like parallelizations. You can run multiple things at the same time. We'll have like the idea of like more complex, like human in the loop logic. So being able to say, hey, this is a 10-step process. These first 4 steps can be executed by anybody, but this
Yep.
5th step is really sensitive. It can only be done by somebody on the XYZ team. And so there could be a handoff concept happening in the middle of it.
I
So
mean,
that kind of stuff as well.
it sounds like that's even on the track toward constructing these like general purpose data pipelines of sorts, because like you could have one thing that emits like a bunch of things, and then something else that comes along and consumes the output of that, and like do you foresee that as that being a potential evolution here?
Potentially. And even today, people use Airplane for really simple data pipeline type things. We don't
Yeah.
see ourselves as like an Airflow competitor or something of that nature.
Okay.
So I think like when you're doing really sophisticated things at like a high level of scale, I think it's better to just use like Airflow or Luigi or whatever
Okay.
for that kind of stuff. But like there's the thing we see with Airplane is like a lot of people are using Airflow for like really simple stuff, like really simple pipelines that like
Yep.
honestly don't require a lot of the complexity or configurability of something like an Airflow. And so in
Yep.
those situations, like, yeah, we do intend Airplane to be like a um, simpler replacement for stuff like that.
Okay, got it. Got it. Do you have any plans, like investing more into that development environment, or sorry, not the. You don't have a development environment, but like the editor that you showed off in the GUI. You mentioned like the preferred way of using Airplane right now is, you write the script in whatever editor or environment you have, and then you upload it. And like Airplane is strictly a runtime. But I feel like when you're doing that demo, it's almost like a short leap to you already have autocomplete, you already have syntax
Yeah.
highlighting. Another thing that you see with a lot of these new kind of cloud-based programming tools is a developer environment of some sort. Any plans to do that, or do you think you'll stick to just providing the runtime and not really getting into the development side at all?
Yeah. So in terms of like the development environment, honestly, we're of two minds on it. I think right now, I think we're more likely to build like a VS Code plugin than we are to like build like a full-fledged in-browser
Okay.
IDE or whatever you want to call it.
Yep.
Though I think like it's kind of when I say we're of two minds, like on one hand we have this idea of what Airplane of how you should use Airplane, like this sort
Mm-hmm.
of like quote unquote proper way to do it. But there is friction with sort of like setting up your local dev environment to be Airplane compatible, and so the in-browser stuff is like the cleanest onboarding flow, right?
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
all in one place. You don't have to like go do a bunch of stuff with your CLI and fiddle with that. And so I think like probably we'll do that as well at some point. It's just like a question of prioritization. And so like I think like making the sort of like local dev experience better and better and better gets you like it's the thing that drives more expansion and retention of Airplane. Like it's the thing that makes sure that Airplane works really well at scale in a company and that it's easy to onboard new developers onto it, all that kind of stuff. But it's not the thing that like delivers that magic aha moment as efficiently as possible, which the
Right.
in-browser stuff does better. So
Right.
like you kind of have to have both in some sense. Like
Yeah.
I mentioned Vercel earlier as a tool I admire. When you first sign up for Vercel, like it's actually all in browser, like the way they get you up and running with the
Right.
products.
Right.
But then like you really have to, use a CLI at some point to you know,
Yeah.
use it sort of at scale in a real organization. So we'll strike some balance there, I think.
Interesting. Interesting. Are there any users like asking for features like that, or just like other features that like don't quite fit into? Because this is like constant tension I feel with a lot of companies,
Yeah.
especially ones that are early. It's like you come to the table with like some preconception of how your product ought to be used, but then
Yeah.
your early users, especially if you have good ones, they use it in all sorts of creative ways that you don't anticipate. Are there like different camps of users right now that you're trying to satisfy, or is it more or less like that you know they don't want the development environment, they just want the kind of simple runtime to run these simple actions, and that's the path forward?
Yeah, I mean, people are asking for all of the above. I would say like, and all of it I think does fit on the path of things that we want to build. I would say like the places where people try to push the product where we're actually kind of not necessarily trying to go there. I
Hmm.
alluded to earlier, we're not trying to be Airflow, right? We're not trying to get into like
Yeah.
super complicated bespoke data pipelining workflows. Um, I think like or like for another example, we're not necessarily trying to allow people to build like super pixel perfect internal workflows. Like, for most
Right.
companies, they're like, hey, this is some random internal tool. And you like make it quickly and move on. But for
Yeah.
a small subset of companies, are like, actually, this internal tool is really important. Like this internal
Right.
tool needs to, it's getting run 50,000 times a day by a team of a bazillion people.
Yep.
And I need to make sure that it's really, really like done in a way that can't have any deviation or error or anything like that. And so to make sure like it's perfect, like if that's what you're trying to do, like you should probably just write it in pure software or use some open source framework that's more extensible or something like that.
Yep.
Because with Airplane, like we're really optimized around speed and simplicity. Like we're,
Hmm.
we're going for that long tail of stuff in your organization that you don't want to build into your product, that you don't want to write like code from the ground up for, that you want to spend as little time on as possible. And so that's kind of like the niche. But like inevitably, when you've started using Airplane, you have 50 tasks built into it. You're going to want to push the boundaries of what
Totally.
it's capable of, and you're going to want to say like, hey, like a lot of people ask like, hey, can I like invoke an Airplane task through an API and then have it be sort of like an end user facing thing, so our users can like hit a button that invokes an Airplane task. I'm like, You can if you really want to, but that's not what we're trying to do. We're not supposed to be your application backend, right? Like,
Yeah.
we're for internal stuff, right? And that's kind of like the directions in which people try to push the product that aren't necessarily where we're trying to go.
Yeah. That's fascinating because that's almost like this thing was built for things that you didn't want to put in the product. Now people are
Yeah.
trying to build parts of their product on top of.
Yeah, and they
as a
never
backend.
start there, right? They start with the stuff that it's intended for. I
Yeah.
think that's why they signed up for it. That's the marketing message that resonated. But then
Yep.
they put like 20 things in there, they're like, well, but maybe I could, do this more, other thing in here, right?
And the functionality's already there. Why, like write
Exactly,
it?
yeah.
Yeah. I know how that goes. Cool. So we're almost at the end of the hour here. Thanks again so much for taking the time. One last question: if folks are listening to this and want to check out Airplane, what should they do?
Yeah, so we're a self-serve product with a free tier. So pretty generous free tier. We can do quite a bit. So you can go to airplane.dev, DEV, and just sign up for a free account. You can also email me personally, Ravi at airplane.dev, RAVI at airplane.dev.
We'll drop
And
a
I'm
link
always
in the
happy
show notes.
to chat and, go through a demo, answer any questions you have, all that kind of stuff.
Cool. Awesome. Well, my guest today has been Ravi Parikh. Ravi, thanks for coming on the show.
Likewise, thank you so much for having me on. It's been a lot of fun.